Hello, everyone. Welcome to the GEMS podcast. I am so glad you all are here.
Today we are so lucky to be joined by Dr. Joyonna Gamble-George, a neuroscientist. So we are so happy to have you. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you're from?
So I was born in Tampa, Florida. I grew up on the East Coast of the United States between the states of Florida, rural Alabama on my grandparents' farm in Maryland. I'm also the first one in my family to and I'm also the first in my family to get a PhD. So most of my family members are either working or have worked in other fields like education, law, or administration. So I can tell you a little bit about my parents. So my mother is a computer specialist at Raytheon Company, and in that role, she works as a contractor property administrator for NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. And the Raytheon contract with NASA, what it does is that it monitors the temperatures on the Earth and writes the software that deploys the satellites into space. So her academic background, she actually earned an Associate of Art in Computer Information Science from Strayer University. So my dad, so I guess you could say I'm from military back. My father is a retired colonel from the United States Army. When he worked in the U.S. Army, he served as a military intelligence officer, a project manager, and he was also a commander. So with a little bit about his academic background, he earned a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, and that's a public, historically black college and university. He also has two masters. One is in Human Resource Management, and the other one is in Project Management from Devery University. And he also has a Master of Business Administration from Johns Hopkins University.
Wow, so you grew up with parents that were high achieving, put a lot of emphasis in education, and that was your support network.
Yes.
Okay, so what about you? Where did you go to school, and how did you, so obviously that's how you got put on your trajectory to aim for higher education, but what were your stepping stones and your educational stepping stones?
So I moved around a lot. One of the reasons was my father was in the military. So I grew up down south, but I moved up north to Maryland. Especially in my early teens, I moved to Greenbelt, Maryland. And I attended Greenbelt Middle School, and also there I went to high school. So I attended Eleanor Roosevelt High School. So I graduated from Eleanor Roosevelt High School, which is a recognized presidential school of excellence with merit from the School of Science and Technology program. And there I was exposed to science and research. I also earned a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry and Biology with honors in mathematics from Xavier University of Louisiana. And that's a private Roman Catholic, historically black college and university. Then I went on to get a Master of Health Administration from the University of South Florida College of Public Health in Tampa. And then I moved from Florida back up to Nashville, Tennessee, where I completed a PhD in neuroscience from Vanderbilt University.
Wow, so you were talking about how your high school was a recognized presidential school of excellence for science and technology. Is that right?
Yes, it was.
And so was it in high school when you started beginning this love of STEM and wanted to pursue that, or was there an experience or person before that drew you into the field?
So I would say one individual that influenced me to go into STEM was my grandmother. Her name was Mrs. Linda Gamble-Petway, and she raised me on a farm in rural Alabama. So she was like my biggest inspiration. She was a retired school teacher and believed in the importance of giving back to the community. So because of her, I saw how scientific discovery can be seen as a form of humanitarianism, especially when it is used to save lives by creating cures for common diseases that affect people worldwide. So that's the individual that inspired me, but the life experience that inspired me. When I was a kid, I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I thought about being an artist, a physician, or a scientist. And it wasn't until I completed a summer research program while I was a high school student that was sponsored by NASA that I thought about becoming a scientist. And through the Science and Engineering Apprentice Program, I got to conduct research in the Department of Chemistry. My scientific study focused on the physical sciences. So it centered on trying to study or investigate the bonding structure between molybdenum, which is a nutrient food found in vegetables, milk, and whole grains. And we were trying to understand the bonding structure with molybdenum and these amino acid type compounds. And the importance of the study was that molybdenum was due to its relation to the disease known as gout, which is a severe form of arthritis, and it has this hallmark characteristic of excessive production of uric acid when you consume too much molybdenum. So that right there sparked my interest in science, but I still wasn't a little bit sure if I wanted to be a scientist. I knew I wanted to become a scientist later on in life while I was working in a research lab during my graduate studies at the University of South Florida. So when I was finishing my graduate certificate program in health sciences, I got an email about a volunteer opportunity to do neuroscience research at a hospital, and I thought it would be cool to do research that involves studying the human brain. So I responded to the email. I interviewed with the lab leader, which they refer to as a principal investigator, and I started doing experiments using drugs that have been known to treat kidney cancer to see if they can treat memory problems, such as those in people with a form of dementia like Alzheimer's disease. And this research opportunity was my first chance to do research that concerns the human brain. After this opportunity, I was completely hooked on neuroscience research. And I will say a little bit over 2 years later, I moved to Florida. I'm from Florida to Tennessee to complete my doctoral degree in neuroscience at Vanderbilt University.
Okay, I got it. So you did research with memory problems, and that's what got you into neuroscience. But didn't you do research with herbal supplements?
Yes.
Before that, right? That was before the brain.
Yes, I did. So when I was an undergrad at the University of Louisiana, I did research trying to see if alternative medicine, so the alternative medicine we were looking at were herbal supplements, licorice root, and saw palmetto, and we wanted to see if it could sort of stop the cancer cells from increasing in terms of growth. So, and this was in a model of human prostate cancer. So we would treat these prostate cancer cells and with different concentrations of the herbal supplements and see like which one was better at reducing cellular growth of these cancer cells. So I think that experience itself really got me into wanting to do more research with drug therapies, because a lot of the research I've done has been on finding potential cures for common diseases. So that one was like in cancer biology, and then when I went to go work in that hospital for the VA, it was focusing on like, people who have like dementia or memory problems, or people that suffer from anxiety and depressive disorders. But it's always been about, okay, what drugs that can potentially treat these or help people with managing better a particular disease or disorder.
And you wanted to help people because of your grandmother, who was a humanitarian type of person. Isn't that right?
Yeah, so my grandmother, she always believed in giving back to the community. I would always see her helping people, taking care of people, like the elderly, especially when they were sick. She would always go and visit with them and bring them food and make sure they were okay. And she was really big on, getting a quality education and just helping people with, just getting through their everyday lives, smoothly. So she was my biggest inspiration, because I really saw, science as a way, when you're discovering things like treatments and cures for people, it is in a way you're helping society. And what she was doing at the same time was helping the society, so I just connected the two together. And she inspired me to really stay in STEM.
Absolutely. And you did your own type of community outreach and service to others and internationally. So from my understanding, you went to Ethiopia. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I went to Ethiopia. So I went to Ethiopia to organize a conference overseas. I went to Addis Ababa, and we were bringing together students from across the world. And these are students that are in medicine, public health, nursing. They can be pharmacists or studying like pharmacology, as well as, other life sciences or biomedical sciences. And we wanted them to come together, network, and talk about the things that they were doing in their own respective countries to combat global health disparities. So we had the students, sometimes they'll present on their research or the strategies that they've actually implemented in their countries to combat global health disparities. And it was just an opportunity for people to learn from one another and engage with each other in order to take that information back to their own countries or places where they live, and then try to implement it there to see if it was effective at doing or like combating global health disparities.
And
then
no, keep going. Go ahead.
Okay, so then I also went on a mission trip to the Dominican Republic called El Yaya. So I went there because, for one, I had never been out of the country before. And I just told myself, one point in life, I want to be able to just see the world and learn about other people and how they live and their cultures and their belief systems. Because I really think it really helps with trying to understand people better and to communicate with them. So I took it upon myself. I decided to go on a mission trip. And this is when I was at the University of South Florida College of Boca. So we went to El Yaya, and I actually got to spend a couple of nights with a family that stayed in this close-knit village. And there, I worked in the clinic, and I would actually give treatment to the people that live in the community. And they had just really basic health issues, but a lot of it dealt with like poor sanitation, and sometimes they had infections. So I did that a little bit, and then I also did stuff with health education, just telling them how to improve their health or having just improving or changing their lifestyle or their behaviors. And then we built outhouses, because sometimes the water that they were drinking from will sometimes collide also with the water from the outhouses. So we built outhouses where that wouldn't happen. And then also we learned how to build stoves out of clay, which was really cool. So that experience was really uplifting. But I really enjoyed it because I really got a chance to just make a difference. And I don't know, for me, I love just learning about people from different walks of life and understanding, especially when it comes to their thinking processes and their life experiences, just trying to learn more about them and how they go about their lives.
Yeah. So you were talking about in a clinic, you have the ability to treat these people. And for high schoolers, much like the gyms who are looking into different career pathways and trying to differentiate and decide whether they want to go towards the research route and perhaps gain a PhD, or they want to, become a physician and gain an MD. How did you make your decision and which one you would want to do, and what would you tell high school students of if they're trying to decide which one? How did you make that decision?
So I think the one thing I can say is that physicians, even though they do treat patients, some of them also do research. And then also as a researcher or a scientist, you might not be treating patients, but at least you would be the one to create the therapies for the patients to help them with their particular disorder, disease. So you do get to work with like human samples. So I just want them to understand that you can still get access to like doing stuff, dealing with patient care both ways. It's just a little differently. But I knew I wanted to pursue STEM in my career when I acquired a love for studying how brain cells called neurons work as a neuroscientist. And what excites me about these cells is that I get to discover as a scientist what happens to them when they malfunction and what I can do to fix them when they do not work properly. I find this exciting because it's similar to solving a puzzle with a lot of missing pieces, and it's quite challenging, especially since humankind does not know everything about the brain and how it functions. We're still learning about new processes and pathways that occur in the brain for use to carry on ordinary functions such as memorizing events, places, or people, or even having a preference for one thing over another. And the other thing, as a scientist, I have the ability to use my mind and cool tools and machines to create treatments or technologies that can help people manage or cure their health conditions, even prevent them from getting a particular disease or disorder. And the other thing about being a scientist, I also get to inspire future generations of students like yourself, especially young girls and minorities, to desire a career as a scientist and provide an example of all the STEM career possibilities they can achieve.
So when you're talking about inspiring these minorities or girls that are taking that path towards STEM, did you experience obstacles, or was there an apparent gap between people who looked like you and people who didn't while you were becoming a scientist?
Yes. So the biggest challenges I have faced in my career are people not always accepting me, even with my educational credentials, talent, and skills as a scientist, because they have preconceived stereotypes about what they think a scientist should look like externally. I've experienced a lot of microaggressions and even discrimination due to my ethnicity and sex. But I do not dwell on it or let it deter me from my aspirations in life. I always try to turn that negative energy into positive energy and continue to pursue my career path, because I know who I am proud of who I am, and I know I have what it takes to be a great scientist. Is there an apparent gap between male and female roles in STEM fields? Yes, there is. When I was majoring in neuroscience as a PhD trainee at a predominantly white institution, I observed a significant diversity disparity. I had very little exposure to female mentors, especially those that self-identify as African American or Black, or who that even worked in the biomedical sciences. And the interesting thing is that the U.S. population of working class will eventually become a majority minority. So I'm talking about people that self-identify as Black, Indigenous, or person of color, and majority female in the future. Yet a lot of minorities and females, especially those that work in the biomedical sciences, are still underrepresented as awardees of STEM doctoral degrees from U.S. universities. And even in the STEM workforce as tenured professors, scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians. And then the other interesting thing is that women make up about half of the total U.S. college, 28% of the science and engineering workforce. So this diversity disparity really continues to persist due to many social and cultural factors.
And by becoming a scientist and by doing the outreach and things like that, you and so many other women who are professionals in STEM are changing that narrative and that perspective that a scientist can look different than what we think, what we would have thought, in the past. So as a scientist, what do you do day to day? What does every day look like for you?
So, during my doctoral studies when I was at Vanderbilt University, I became an entrepreneur. So I co-founded a biotech company that we call SciX, and we're searching for data science-based methods to combat brain disorders and other health issues. So as a scientist, at my biotech company, I get to direct the research behind and development of wearable devices that are aimed at improving chronic health conditions in patients. So a typical day for me involves writing up experimental designs for future research projects and working with a team of technologists, software engineers, and other scientists to create a prototype of the devices we dream of creating. I also get to tell the public about my scientific discoveries in the form of written works published in scientific journals or orally at meetings and seminars. I'm also a neuroscientist, so I did get my PhD in neuroscience at Vanderbilt University. And as a neuroscientist, I studied how emotions work in the brains of animals to find ways to reduce anxiety and depression in people. So in addition, I also get to create art and graphic designs, as a neuroscientist, to express the emotions I study in my research. And currently, I am a AAA Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the National Institute of Health. So in that role, I serve as an expert science advisor for doctors, psychologists, nurses, and even other scientists that are all across the United States that conduct research in lung diseases and mental health in people living with HIV. So I have like a few different hats right now.
You're juggling a few things at once.
Yes.
So with your SciX company, in what form is the wearable technology? Is it, you can wear it as a bracelet or ring, neck? Like what are you targeting at what part of the body?
Right now we're thinking about just starting with a ring, but we have to also think that not all people might want to wear a ring, so we're thinking about other forms of having the wearable technology in, so then we can reach a broader audience or customer base. But we're definitely right now we're focusing on doing a ring. And then the other thing is we don't just create the device, we're also creating the software application that's integrated into the device or that you can download to like maybe your iPhone or maybe your laptop or your computer.
And so these are going to be, the customers would be people who are patients living with different diseases, and this would track their, information for physicians to use in their treatment.
Yes. So one project that we're working on is creating like an algorithm that can make predictions about life-threatening events. So it could be like a heart attack or a stroke. And it would be for people that might be at risk for heart disease or actually have heart disease or maybe a family history of heart disease. And it will track, basically, right now we're just focusing on vital signs, but we're trying to expand it a little bit more, where it takes in the vital signs from the biosensors, but also it will collect information from maybe your visit with a physician at a clinic or their medical practice or a hospital. So it takes your pre-existing medical history in addition to what it's getting in real time and try to make sense of all of that to make that prediction if you're going to have a heart attack or a stroke down the line. And what it does is there's an immediate emergency where you might actually have a heart attack or a stroke, it will contact the emergency medical services in time for them to come out to you. Because there are sometimes when people are in the midst of a heart attack, stroke, they cannot get to the phone in time to call 911, so somebody can come out and help them. So we're trying to give that little bit of window of time or extra time so that someone who is at risk for that can get the medical care that they need in time.
Wow. Okay, so, and then also, like, as a neuroscientist working with mice and their emotions and things like that, and studying how to, like, reduce anxiety and depression from them and then transferring it to people, like, what are your, like, method? How did you, like, come up with your method to that? Like, were you just, that was something that you were given through your job, or do you have to discover it on your own and, like, come up with your own research projects, if that question makes sense?
Yes, it makes sense. So, as a scientist, what scientists do is that they build on other scientists' previous work. So I didn't have to like come up with all the different methods to test like the different behaviors in the animals. So some were already established, but you do have times where you do have to create things. So I remember when I was a PhD student, I was apparently approaching a scientific question the wrong way. So the drugs we were using with the animals that we were trying to see if they were reducing anxiety in them, it wasn't working when they were exposed to stress. So I had to actually modify the animal behavior test that examined anxiety in the animals to determine why this was occurring. And I found out that the animals, even from the same strain or species, had individual differences in anxiety after stress exposure. So I had to actually modify that animal behavior test in order to get it to work so that I can understand why this was working in some animals as opposed to others it wasn't working.
So it's always checking and see if something works, and if it doesn't, you take another path. It's that's kind of how your day looks. Just going at that in a different way. Well, so what advice would you have for young girls that are interested in your field?
So there's three pieces of advice I would give them. The first one is for young girls to be unique and always try to think outside of the box. So when I was in high school, my art teacher, nicknamed Froggy, would tell us to always try to be different and unique when it came to creating a piece of art. And this advice has been quite helpful in my research because sometimes you have to think outside the box when it comes to understanding how biological processes in the human brain and the rest of our bodies work, especially when you want to develop a cure to treat them when they do not work properly. The other piece of advice I would give to young girls is to know, claim, and own your worth. Do not settle for less in life and know what you deserve in life, especially with regards to your STEM career. Do not give away your power and your joy to others, but aim for your dreams in STEM, despite the odds that may be against you at times. Lastly, always try to be a living, breathing example of female excellence in STEM. Future generations that aspire to pursue a STEM education career will look to you one day for guidance and you as a role model or a potential mentor. And the last piece of advice I would give is don't let negativity or people's actions or words deter you from your dreams. When you let people's actions or events that you endure in life defer your dreams, you are denying yourself the chance to see whether or not your dreams become a reality and how they can see in your pursuit to become a STEM professional. Always strive to live the life you want to live, to pursue the dreams and career paths you want to achieve, and to never give up on you and your lifelong aspiration regardless of the hardships you may face.
Thank you. So I am going to backtrack just a little bit. So you said that you worked in a VA, in the VA system, and you were working on programs that would be implemented to promote or benefit those accessing that health care. Is that right?
So I had two different jobs when I worked at the VA. So as a scientist, it was during my graduate studies, I worked at the VA, and we were like experimenting with drugs that had been known to treat kidney cancer to see if they could also treat memory problems, such as those in people with a form of dementia like Alzheimer's disease. And with that research opportunity, that was my first opportunity to do research concerning the human brain. Now, the other time I worked at the VA, I was a health system specialist. That was also during my graduate study, but it was before I actually started doing neuroscience research. So there I did research on assessing Florida trauma system and trying to understand whether or not the current Florida trauma system were actually meeting the needs of the patient. So were they in close proximity to the patients? The patients were able to get to them in time. Once the patient was, in a trauma center, were they being treated, properly, and their needs were being met? Then the other thing I did in that position, I did a fellowship that was under the American Hospital Association. So I actually had to go into a VA hospital, and I was given like two problems. One was dealing with there was a delay in processing veterans benefits, so I had to come up with a solution to improve that process. And then the other one was improving patient-to-nurse relationships, and that was because a lot of the nurses at that time were being overburdened. So they had a lot of patients, but it wasn't that many nurses. So the nurse to patient ratio was very low. So they were overburdened, and sometimes the customer satisfaction on the patient side wasn't so great as a result because they were just being overworked. So for that one, I had to come up with a solution as well. And I got to do like focus groups with the employees, as well as the patients, and try to figure out, what's the problem and how do you go about solving it. And so one solution for the one with the delays with the Veterans Benefits application was just bringing in a form of technology that can increase the efficiency of the processing of the application. So then the veterans wouldn't have to wait so long, for their application to be processed before they actually get seen, at a VA hospital. And then the solution I came up with, the issues with the nurses and the patients with their relationship, was that is to have the nurses actually sit on committees that are making a lot of decisions, about their workload, so that they can bring in their input about what is actually going on the floor. And then also have a customer service, like suggestion box or a package for the patient, where they can provide suggestions of how to improve some of the things that are going on with them.
So I asked that question because my high school is adjacent to Fort Benning, and we are currently in the process of building a VA hospital. So that is just something locally that relates to some of the work that you've done.
Yes.
Yes. I am really backtracking just because I want to cover everything that you've done. So I know that you work with targeted or like developing therapies and drugs and things to help people, but you are also looking at addictive drugs with methamphetamines, and how it affects the brain. So could you just talk a little bit about that?
So when I was at Meharry Medical College, so before I started my PhD at Vanderbilt University, I did a little bit of research at Meharry Medical College, and we were studying the subchronic effects of methamphetamine on animal behavior. So we would give mice a certain dose of methamphetamine and see how it would affect their behaviors. But then we were also looking for potential biomarkers that were being affected in the brain. So we were trying to see if methamphetamine, when an individual takes methamphetamine, does it affect like motivation or their learning processes, which is linked to dopamine homeostasis. So there's these chemical messengers that are produced within your brain cells that are called neurons, and they're referred to as neurotransmitters. So the neurotransmitter, we were focusing on dopamine, but there's a lot of proteins that are in the neuron that plays a role in synthesizing dopamine. So, or as well as transporting it and helping one dopamine neuron communicate with another one. So one of those we were focusing on was the dopamine transporter. So that's one of the biomarkers. We were seeing how it was affected. Then we're looking at how the enzyme that plays a role in the synthesis of dopamine, which is known as TH or tyrosine hydroxylase, how that was affected as well. So we looked at behavior, but we also looked at biomarkers. So I did that a little bit before I started getting into doing the research at Vanderbilt on anxiety and depression. But when I went and did my postdoc after I finished my PhD at Vanderbilt, I started going back into drug addiction research. But I was doing it from a different angle, where we were trying to understand how HIV and drug addiction was intertwined. Because sometimes people that are positive for HIV, they do abuse drugs. And we're trying to see, okay, if somebody has HIV and maybe that is making them still sell drugs that can be abused. So we have this hypothesis that apparently they might be seeking out drugs of abuse because the dopamine levels of their neurons are reduced. And so trying to get those levels back up by seeking those drugs of abuse.
And so this is just a personal question for me. When you use mice models, obviously that's where we start, so it can be applicable to humans. Yeah. And when you were working with stress and anxiety, what was the stressor that, how did you enact or, I guess, invoke that sense in mice? What was the stressor?
Okay, so we had two different types of stressors. The animals for a particular amount of time, and then so both of those stresses would induce anxiety, depending on how long it's done or how intense the foot shock is. So those were our two stressors.
Could you repeat the second one? I'm so sorry. It just cut out and I didn't hear it.
So the second stressor that we used was a light foot shock. So we would just shock the paw of a mouse. So that would induce anxiety. So depending on how long the stressors were, implemented with the animal, and how intense the foot shock was, then sometimes it would increase the anxiety in the animals.
I get it now. I understand. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your contributions to science and paving the way for underrepresented groups in STEM. I'm so appreciative that you took the time to talk to me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you all for listening. If you have any questions or comments, you can contact us through Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, @KolgaGems. You can also reach us through email. Our email is kolgagems@gmail.com. That is COLGAGEMS. And I'll see y'all next time.